something in my closet. Just to start this off, I'm not sure if these encounters are all connected, and to be frank, I'd like to believe they're not. Anyways, it was in late 2022, and all my family except for me was sick with COVID. Obviously, during that time, you were supposed to quarantine as to not spread the sickness, and seeing as I was the only healthy one, lucky me I know, my family chose me as the sacrifice to go into the public and get groceries so we all didn't starve. Thankfully, we live right next to a Walmart, so I wouldn't be driving or going anywhere far. And after a grueling 2 hours of grocery shopping, I parked in our driveway and popped the trunk open to get the groceries out and put away. I remember it being a cool summer afternoon. I could hear the tree leaves rustling and the birds chirping as I walked in and out of my house, putting my bags down and walking back to the car in a repeated manner. Finally, I was down to only a few bags left. Unfortunately, as I was about to grab them, I felt a shiver go down my spine. It made me sick to my stomach almost, and even worse, the birds that were supposed to be chirping suddenly went silent. I was slowly starting to freak out as I grabbed the 2 bags and closed the trunk. Suddenly, right as I reached my porch, I heard an ear-piercing scream from the distance. Just for a bit of quick context, I live next to a train yard set behind a station, so there's nothing but railroads and open land for quite a distance. Knowing this, it seemed weird that anyone would venture out over there, only because the probability of getting hit by a train coming in was something no one wanted to mess with. But that scream sounded so close and yet so far. I even saw a bunch of birds fly up from the direction where I assumed it originated. I quickly rushed into the house and slammed the door closed behind me. Since then, I assumed it was some dumb teenagers or something messing around the tracks, obviously ignoring the sudden sense of unease and everything around me going quiet, but I chose to be oblivious. Of course, what happened a few months after didn't really help me either. So it was very late night and I was studying while on call with a friend of mine. At that point, I didn't have the LED lights I have now, so I was in complete darkness aside from my phone light and my computer screen. While sitting in bed yapping and typing things out, I ended up losing my vape in the sheets of my bed. Panicked, I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight, frantically looking for it, quickly finding it under a blanket fold. I go to turn my flashlight off, and just as I was about to, I look in front of me towards my closet. Now, my closet doors were closed, but they have sort of a small crack in between, and as I looked more, it seemed like my light was reflecting on something, making it glow. Like when you take a picture of your dog with the flash on. In the picture, their eyes are like glowing orbs. It was sort of similar in this sense, but I chalked it up to maybe a hand mirror or something sparkly reflecting from my flashlight, and just chose to look into it the next morning. The next morning came around and I was, of course, running very late for school, so I quickly rushed out to catch the bus. Later when I got home, though, I found my front door wide open. The doormat was also moved from its place on the ground. Like when you have a rug on tile and it slides when you get your footing wrong. That's what it reminded me of. I thought maybe one of my parents left it open by accident when they got home from work and slipped on the doormat by accident, and ultimately just chose to walk in and upstairs to my room without putting much thought into it. As I turned the corner to the end of the hallway where my room was, I saw my bedroom door wide open. I panicked, of course, thinking my mom went through my room, as I remembered my graveyard of vapes and other miscellaneous things I didn't want her to find. As I walked in expecting my room to be disheveled, I was relieved when I found nothing touched. Nothing but my closet doors being opened as well. I peer in, and I see everything's in its place. It's a relief until I remember what happened the night before, and I realize that where the glow was in the crack of the doors, there's nothing but blank wall. So ultimately, nothing could have reflected my flashlight's glow. This freaked me out, and I ended up sleeping in my parents' room for a few weeks. After that, I lost the privilege and safety of sleeping on my parents' floor. I guess they got fed up that their daughter in high school got scared out of her own room, so they sent me back telling me to man up, in their words. That first night of sleeping on my own had me on edge and I barely got any sleep. Around midnight, I believe I was scrolling on my phone when I heard something hit my window. The thud sent me into panic and I ran to my parents' room without thought, and my mom just had me sleep with her in the bed that night. I woke up right as I saw sunlight through the shutters and rushed to the back porch. I reasoned with myself and thought maybe it was a bird or owl that just didn't see my window coming, and as I opened my back door and peered out, I found nothing on the ground. Didn't find any feathers or debris, My room's on the second floor, so there's no way a person could run into it. Again, I got scared and just slept in my parents' room until I got the guts to finally go into my own room again. A few years passed and everything calmed down, it seems. I quit being a scaredy cat and just chose to rationalize everything or block it from my field of thought. I even got brave enough to start going on walks at night with my dog, just because it seemed more relaxing. One night, as I was making rounds around the block with my furry best friend in tow, I noticed sounds coming from one of the trains parked on the tracks next to a line of houses. Even better, I saw one of them sort of shaking or moving. It was a full moon that night, so I was able to see somewhat clearly. As I squinted my eyes and tried to look a little bit closer, I was horrified to see something climbing onto one of the carts. I can't make out what it was in a forward sentence. It was dark, and even with the light of the moon I couldn't see much. But I saw that it was long and spindly. Its arms and legs seemed like sticks, and its torso was thin and long. It was trying to climb up the side of train cart, and just looking at it made me hightail it out of there as I grabbed my dog and ran home. Slamming the door behind me once I got inside, I frantically locked it and made my way to my sister's bedroom so I could sleep in her extra bed that night. That encounter set me back so badly, everything I believed in was just washed away. I find myself going through forums and podcasts and listening to all the encounters of other people. Ultimately, I choose not to think of that night often, and I don't push myself to try and find out what it is. I just would rather it be a mystery, or even a trick of the moonlight maybe. The creature in the closet. My name is Nina Warnier. I live in Limburg, that is the most southern province of the Netherlands. I'm 20 years old, and all my life I've been wanted to work as a caretaker for people with a disability. Just a few months ago my dream came true, and now I work as a full-time caretaker at a living facility in Maastricht. At this facility my story takes place. The living facility is positioned just outside of Maastricht City, and before the building became a housing facility, it was a laundromat for the people living on that street. The facility consists of 3 houses that are internally connected. Each house can house 8 people. That makes a total of 24 patients that live in the facility. Each patient has his or her own room, ranging from small to large, to a separate bathroom and kitchen, to a shared bathroom on the hallway. I first started working at this facility when I was just 17 years old as an intern for my education. The story started 2 years ago, when one of the patients that had lived there for 3 years moved out to live at another facility. His family claimed that the patient did not feel safe in his room because he would hear knocking coming from his closet. We made our apologies for the inconvenience but didn't think much of it. 1 month later, when the room was cleaned and disinfected, a new patient came to live in the empty room. It was an elderly man, who I'll just call Rick for privacy reasons. Rick was a warm and kind-hearted man who always loved talking about the horses he had as a child and his great love for Russian opera. You'd always catch him sneaking into the kitchen to get a snack or hear him sing opera. I must admit he'd quite had a powerful and wonderful voice. At first he would bid us a good night before he went to bed, but as time digressed, Rick seemed more and more distressed. He didn't eat and drink as much as he used to, and he lost weight at troubling speed. He'd sit quietly on the couch, staring blankly at nothing. When asked what was wrong, he'd say he'd had a terrible nightmare of some kind of creature lurking in his closet. My colleagues and I debated whether or not he could be getting Alzheimer's and would need testing for it. He'd been tested, but nothing came out of the tests. Every night Rick would scream us awake, and when we came into the room he'd be sitting on his bed, trembling and pointing at his closet. He'd say that something crawled out of the closet and joined him in his bed. He'd describe the creature as being skinny, even bony, with rotting meat hanging from its bones. The creature had green eyes the same color as his deceased mother and huge fingers that ended in claws. The creature's face was that of a human skull, with the green eyes being nothing more than small lights and a mouth that was filled with sharp teeth like a crocodile his teeth. The creature would lay next to him in his bed and wrap its claws around his body. Rick described so vividly how he could smell the horrible scent of a decaying body as the creature opened his mouth to whisper in his ear, "Get out! This is not your home!" Rick would cover his ears as he said that and peed himself. Poor Rick. My colleague checked the closet, but there was nothing there, and the only thing we could say was that everything was going to be fine. Fast forwards about a month later, and Rick would wake up with markings all over his body. Deep scratches that looked like claw marks, bite marks, deeper and more animal-like than any human bite. Rick would not want to go into his room anymore, and he'd bring his dinner to his room and place it at the door of the closet. My colleagues would take away the food, much to Rick his horror. He'd say that we would make the creature angry, and if the creature was angry, it would punish him. I still feel sorry for him, especially seeing the fear in his eyes as we scolded him and took away the plate. 2 weeks of the same happening, and I and one of my closest colleagues were working the night shift. We were making our usual round, checking if everyone was sleeping and all the machinery were still up and running, when we heard a horrible, bone-chilling scream echo through the building. The scream came from Rick his room. We stormed in, throwing the door open hard, revealing a horrible sight. Rick was laying on his back on his bed while he was gasping for air, while he clawing at his neck and chest, ripping the flesh off, making bloody gashes all over his upper body. His bed and himself were covered in blood, and there was a trace of blood leading to his closet, which was slightly opened. My colleagues dialed 112, while I desperately tried to stop Rick from clawing. The only thing Rick did was scream as if possessed and stare at the ceiling. After what seemed like forever, the ambulance came and took Rick away. 1 week later, we received the sad news that Rick had died from blood loss. The room once again was empty. The blood was cleaned up by a cleaning company, and the room would be occupied soon enough. But even before the room was occupied, I found another patient standing in the room in front of the closet. "Hey, what are you doing here?" I'd asked her as I walked into the room. The patient had stared at me and had muttered, "This room should not be occupied ever again. It is angering him." "Who's him?" I'd asked with a shaky voice. "You know who I mean, the devil who lived in the closet." After she said that, she walked out of the room and left me breathless. 2 weeks later, and that same patient moved into the room. The exact reason I couldn't remember all I do know is that she too had changed. She can't remember her own name, and all she does is sit in front of the closet and talk to the devil. I don't know what is going on at my work, but strange things keep happening. Colleagues tell stories of hearing footsteps in the hallways, others hear whispers in the garden, and one even claimed to have been attacked by a shadow demon. Whatever is going on, one thing is for sure. The creature in the closet is real, and he's not happy about our patient living in his room. Let me begin the story with a little history, and mind you, everything I'm detailing today is 100% true. My great-grandmother came to America from Cornwall, a city on the very southern tip of England in the early 1910s, and settled in rural Arkansas. This where she finished out her teen years and married her husband, a semi-wealthy proprietor of a local brewery. It's not in existence now, but back then everyone knew of Clack's Brew from Camden, Arkansas. Together they had 3 children, the oldest being my great-aunt Agatha, followed by my great-aunt Belle, and finally the youngest, my grandfather Iva, whom they playfully nicknamed Buddy. Agatha was older than her other 2 siblings by what I'm guessing was 15 years. I'm told that Agatha greatly resented this because she felt obligated to help raise her brother and sister, meaning she didn't get a chance to marry until she was in her mid or late 20s, which for that day and age was rather uncommon. After my great-grandfather had died, Father Young I might add, my great-grandmother Belle and grandfather Iva moved to the city of Mobile, Alabama. My great-aunt Agatha opting to stay behind and living in the house she was born in. Now, as far back as I can personally remember, every Christmas and summer, we'd make the trek up to Camden to visit Aunt Agatha in the old house. My aunt and grandfather called it the old home place, which was basically all I knew it as. I remember all of the really nice antiques all over this old 2-story farmhouse. Cast iron pots and skillets, old china dolls, Victorian plates, old clothing irons that you had to heat up on the stove in order to use. No to mention the creepiest closet in the cellar. I found it all very historic and lovely. Over the years, I noticed that Aunt Agatha loved alone. No husband or children. Not even a cat or anything to keep her company. The more I thought about it, the whole thing became rather unnerving, so I did the best to put it out of my mind. One summer while we were visiting, I asked her, "Auntie, why did you never marry?" She went silent for a while, poured me a glass of lemonade, and sad. "I had a husband once, but he left." I guess I wasn't enough for him. She looked really sad at this point, and I apologized for my rudeness. Later that summer, she began to act strange. My Aunt Belle and grandfather started to talk about how her mind was starting to go. Come Christmas, the Alzheimer's was all too obvious. She would pace back and forth in the hallway connected to the cellar and ramble about the baby. What about the baby? Crying, the baby's crying. The closet. The closet. I woke up one night to the bathroom and I saw her in the hallway with a knife, staring me down with these cold, dead eyes. I froze dead in my tracks and nearly pissed myself as she came at me with the knife, letting out this otherworldly hiss. I ran screaming to my grandfather, who took care of it. I'm not sure how exactly. Soon my Aunt Belle moved in to help take care of Agatha, and within a few years she passed away. We stayed at the old home place while we attended her funeral. I remembered thinking how spooky her house was now. She'd scratched things into the wall and there were shit stains from where she'd thrown her own mess at Aunt Belle and the nurses on occasion. After the funeral, we all went back to Mobile and not much was spoken of Aunt Agatha. I sometimes brought up us all just moving to the old home place because, hey, free house, right? But no, neither my great-grandmother or anyone else wanted to deal with the mess of it all. When I was 18, great-grandmother passed away and we buried her next to her late husband in Camden. Of course, we stayed in the old home place once again, this time for a whole week after the funeral. My Aunt Belle had decided that they'd best clean it up and make it somewhat livable, and maybe rent it out. During the stay, I was tasked with cleaning the thick layer of dust off of everything. Yeah, not a super fun job to say the least, but I got to keep a few of the trinkets I liked, so it wasn't all bad. As I turned down the hallway, I noticed the cellar door and almost without thinking, I went to try and open it. I'd never been down there in all the Christmas and summers that I'd spent there and was suddenly very curious. However, I found myself disappointed to find the door locked. I never thought I'd find a key in a house this big. So I forgot about it, until a few days later, while my mom, grandfather, and aunt were out grabbing lunch. If you don't know, Arkansas has a few restaurants that are really great, and this one place called Burgermeister had a bacon cheeseburger to die for. While they were out, I was picking through drawers in the kitchen and packing silverware and plates away, and almost threw an old iron key into one of the boxes. Then it hit me that this might be the key to the cellar. I immediately got up and went to go try the key in the old door and turned. My heart jumped as the lock clicked, and with a gentle push, the door slid open. The hinges let out a horror movie-like creak and I almost chickened out. Nah, you're 18. There's nothing down there that can hurt you, I thought to myself as I fumbled for a light on either side of the door. Finally, I found a pull chain in the darkness, and a dim hanging bulb lit the small cellar. It was about the size of a walk-in closet, and filled with boxes and stacks of newspapers from long before I was born. I almost turned around until something caught my eye, a closet on the far left side of the room. I felt compelled to walk over and open it, and when I did, I was almost knocked back by the awe of dust, smell of mold, and must that filled the little closet. I looked in the dark closet and saw what appeared to be an old handbag, leather with an old brass or rather brassy colored metal holding it shut. I knelt down and picked it up. The bag had some weight to it, so I brought it into the light of the main cellar and opened it. Inside was a lot of silk scarves, moldy, nasty-looking ones. Out of curiosity, I began to unravel them, and then I saw it. 2 black eye sockets of a tiny skull looking back at me. I dropped the bag and ran up the steps, both dizzy from shock and disgust. I lost it and puked in the hallway. I went outside to wait for my family to return to tell them what I found. My family surmised that after Great-Aunt Agatha's husband left her, she discovered that she was pregnant, and either miscarried or worse, had the baby, and then killed it to spare herself the trouble or heartbreak of raising the child of a man who'd abandoned her, and that she, baby Agatha, had been ranting about when she began to lose her mind, was this one hidden away for decades. My grandfather said after a few hours, "I'll take care of this," and together he and Aunt Belle took the handbag containing the tiny skeleton and left. They were gone all night, and the next morning when I asked what they'd done with the baby, they said, "It's taken care of." To this day, I still don't know what they did with it. Either they dropped it off on the police station steps or took it off into the vast wooded areas of Arkansas and buried it. I know nothing was ever reported or ever came of it. Protecting the family name was more important than a proper burial of a nameless baby I'll never know, and they both took the secret to the grave with them,